Evening and a very warm welcome to Newsline Zoom. This evening, Newsline has ventured outside the confines of a studio, and we are on location near Sri Lanka's Parliament, which is as well as it may, because our guest this evening is Mr. JEEWAN THONDAMAN, who is the Secretary General of the CWC and also the Minister in charge of Estates. There's a bit more to that, but we'll get him to tell you that in a moment. We're very pleased to welcome Mr. Thondaman on the program. We waited a rather long time. Very good evening to you, Mr. Thondaman.
Good evening.
And tell me, what is your full portfolio?
I'm the State Minister for Estate Housing and Community Infrastructure.
Right. So how many thousands of people or hundreds of thousands of people work in that sector then?
Well, initially when labours were brought down to Sri Lanka for tea estates, we were looking at about 500 to 600,000. But now, due to advancement of technology and the modernization of society, we are looking at a number between 115 to 135,000.
I see.
Active workers.
And they are all good and proper citizens of Sri Lanka?
I would assume so.
Good. The reason I ask you is, let me put it to you in this context. Now that we have this pandemic going on, are there any concerns as to how the vaccination program and so on is being done in the areas where your constituents live?
Well, initially there was a concern because we were very worried simply because of the fact that Novarelia, especially the estate sector in general, they have what you would know as line rooms. So if one person were to contract COVID, it's the domino effect, and the next house and the next house and so on. So with that being said, we were initially very worried about it, and COVID did come to us at a very critical point because, the nation's economy was harm their life or endanger their life. And, because they see the news and they see certain, news from different countries such as India, where it's heavily politicized and whatnot. So there was a bit of fear, but then we started our social awareness campaign and we did, explain it to the people that you do need to get vaccinated because only once you get vaccinated can, we get out of this pandemic. So people did start cooperating, and the youth, especially in upcountry, I need to thank them because when we ran out of resources, we had asked for volunteers, and there were close to about 1,000 youth who volunteered. They helped us in, providing access for people such as, people who are above the age of 60, and also pregnant mothers to come and get vaccinated. So they were of a big help.
Is there a section of the population out there, up in Novarelia and so on, who are skeptical about getting this vaccine?
Well, I believe that's not just Novarelia, right? On a global scale, if you look at it, there is a significant portion of the population which do not want to get vaccinated.
What do you, as the people's representative from that area, what active programs are you doing or taking, any kind of measures that you're taking to increase awareness and the necessity to get?
Well, under my ministry, we have this instrument called Prajashakti. So Prajashakti was initially created by the late Minister Thondaman, and it was created to boost the IT knowledge of the estate sector, the informal sector within the estate sector. So we had these Prajashakti centers in strategic places throughout the country. We have about 44 centers. So what we decided was initially we tapped into these 44 centers and we started creating awareness programs from school children. And after school children, we started creating awareness program for the estate workers, following which we started targeting the retired workers, who are getting pension. And that was a success because the first day we had a very disappointing rate of 68%, which was one of the lowest recorded in the country. But after we did our awareness programs, and in fact I went on social media and I went live and I put out a few videos, suggesting that people should get vaccinated. Our vaccination rate was at 92%, the turnout, which was recorded as one of the highest in the country. And to be honest, I think it was completely because of our awareness program.
And so with this awareness program underway, having been completed, Do you still have any more further concerns as to the whole program?
Well, we did have a concern, to be very honest, being completely apolitical. Recently you would have noticed, despite the COVID concerns, and as I mentioned earlier, we live in a line room system, it's the domino effect. Yeah. There was a recent protest that took place in Norelia by the teachers union. Now, when it comes to the teachers union, we support their demand for higher wages, but at the same time, there's a way of going about it. And to crowd up in Norelia about 5,000 to 10,000 teachers, and out of which 11 people tested positive. So that again puts the disadvantaged community at risk. So that was our very big concern. But however, the day the protest took place, we immediately converted the THONDAMAN Cultural Center and the THONDAMAN Vocational Training Center into ICCs, Intermediate Care Centers. So because our logic was, if we are having 200 cases a day, that means we need to have 2,000 beds in Norelia to cater to these cases. And we worked with the health officials, the army, and honestly I should thank them, because without them we wouldn't have been able to 60 cases. And then there were 130 cases right after the protest. And now, by God's grace, we were able to bring it back down to 75 cases.
Moving on to other matters, obviously, as you've just said, the plantation sector is a big item, a big ticket item over there. And in terms of that, what do you say to apparent moves to give some of these JEDB estates to new companies who want to farm them anew? Are you pro that? Do you have some concerns about that? And what are they?
Well, I think it's a great move, in my opinion, because, for example, now the JEDB estates, close to about 1,811 acres, if I'm not mistaken, have been given out to 3 different companies. Yeah. I'm sorry, I don't have the names of the companies, but so they were given out to these 3 different companies, and initially we were, a bit skeptical about it. Yeah. But I had a meeting with the ministers, Honorable Ramesh Patyananda and Honorable Mahindananda, and we were able to gather some more details on it. And when it's a dairy farm project that is coming, we welcome it. And at the same time, we found out that not one tea bush is going to be plucked. All these are barren lands. And at the same time, we have to look at the overall picture. And, these being JEDB estates, I mentioned earlier as well, that the rate of growth for tea there has become very minimal. There is no future for tea in those said lands. They're all barren. And they didn't become barren lands over the past 2 years. They become barren lands over the course of 20, 30 years. So this project would significantly boost the economic growth around the said areas. I believe it's namely in Kandy and then whatever Norelia. That's right. So Galapura Estate, Mount Jin Estate, and Great Valley. These 3 places. There's about 728 families living there, and we said these families must be protected at all costs. I mean, economic development can come in, but not at the cost of displacing a community that's living there. So we had a few requests, which we will be bringing it up in a meeting next week in Colombo. The requests are namely, first, that how the companies received such a large amount on lease. These, the 728 families, those that are interested should also be given the option to take a smaller portion of the land on lease, let's say half an acre or an acre or 2 acres, depending on the negotiation. And other than that, we also said that no one should be displaced at any cost, and youth living in that area should be given employment. Let them be Tamil, Sinhala, Muslim, whoever. At the end of the day, if they're Sri Lankan and they belong to these areas, they should be given employment there. You can't take a person from a different district and say, I'm going to give employment here. So those were our demands mainly.
And so you welcome it, but subject to some discussions?
Yes, correct. Because, I mean, if I may add on to it, just so if you look at a tea estate, the labor force was not what it once was. Initially, as I mentioned, there were 500,000 laborers, and now there's about 115 to 135,000 laborers. So with that being said, they comprise only 10% of the Indian origin community. Right. 10%. You have about 1 to 1.5 million Indian origin Tamils, IOTs. So, in every estate, there are only 10 to 15 families that are getting regular work. The remaining are the informal sector, as you mentioned, the 2nd generation or the 3rd generation who don't want to go pluck tea, but rather, they have, their sights on something else like skilled labor and things like that. So when that is the case, now these JEDB lands, if you take a look at it, probably 2 families, 3 families are getting employment there. But let's say a dairy farm comes up, we can create value addition. We can create so much. You can scale it. Thereby, you're giving, opportunities to more families and a sector that we've not given opportunity to, the informal sector. So that is why we are pro-development. I mean, it's not some beverage company or whatever. It's dairy farming.
But you have you established that these are fit and proper companies to undertake this crucial work of development?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, we did let out our demands because for us, protecting and safeguarding the people's rights are, priority. So next week, I believe we'll have a meeting, and once we have that meeting, we'll understand the true nature of this project.
Good. And again, I need to ask you about this. How do you just let's keep to the development of the area? Recently, there was a visit to India to look at, I think, in the state of Haryana, to look at the dairy industry there. And we're now told that we may have the importation of some of that herd there, a particular type of buffalo, I think it was. The cynics out here will say that this is also linked to other government plans to import heifers from New Zealand and Australia and so on. Do you see a connection between the two?
Well, personally, regarding this, the buffalo import, State Minister Vyalendran had gone along with the CWC Vice President, Mr. THONDAMAN. Both of them had gone to India on a state visit, and they gave me an update about this. But the thing is, as you are aware, many governments, previous governments, they had always, imported buffaloes and cows and different breeds and different species into Sri Lanka. But some of them have ended up in a terrible failure. If you're aware of this, I remember there was a point where about 3,000 odd cows were brought down, and then one virus, took a toll on all of them. So it is a good project in my opinion. Because at the end of the day, if we don't have the resources and we are able to get our resources from our neighbors, then well and done. But we should see the logistics behind it, the feasibility behind it.
The concern about the importation of heifers, as you pointed out, was in the past. That the original remit of that, of course, was to bring them and to have them reproduce here, have them over a couple of generations to make them local, if you like, and get them used to the feed and so on. But unfortunately, in the previous government, that sort of thinking was done away with. And we had a situation where these heifers were imported, and they just didn't get on with the feed that was available. You needed, I think, 1 acre per head, and so on and so forth. And so that is the cynics will point out to that and assume or presume that your party is also supporting this move because of the importation of a totally different herd from India, and that's why they'll see this basically, to put it bluntly, that the importation of heifers has, because of the past experience, been looked upon as a scam, whereas there is no other evidence to say about the Indian ones.
No, I mean, if you look at it practically speaking, if we are going to go in for a large consignment where we are planning to bring an entire species here, about say 3,000, 4,000 animals, living animals, first we have to see if the if they could adapt to our terrain. And with that being said, in one move you bring 3,000. That was foolhardy, in my opinion. We have to see what is the feasibility of them first. And second, to answer your question earlier, now CWC supports any move that could possibly increase the economic growth of this country, and we will look for opportunities. We will look at things which could boost them. So, being the Vice President of Ceylon Workers Congress and also the Prime Minister's coordinator, Sendil Thondaman had gone to India on that notion alone, nothing else. And whether it's a scam or not in the previous government, that's not for me to say. You know, that there's evidence always talks. So.
Okay, can we move on to this question of the minimum wage, the 1,000 rupees for the plantation sector workers? Actually, News First Primetime News team. We'll see you on the other side.
News First Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
President to address the United Nations General Assembly later tonight. Engages in multiple bilateral discussions. State Minister's statement is false. Documents pertaining to COVID-19 medicine and medical equipment were received online. A revelation from parliamentarian Harin Fernando.
You are hereby advised to submit your application through ENMRA system. Bambu dhalo kiyawanne.
Government's debt ceiling further extended by 400 billion rupees. New Fortress Energy says it executed a definitive agreement with Sri Lanka to acquire a 40% stake of the Yugadanavi power plant. 47 health trade unions hold demonstrations island-wide, citing numerous demands.
News First Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
And welcome back to Newsline Zoom. I'm in conversation with Mr. JEEWAN THONDAMAN, State Minister, and also, of course, People's Representative for the CWC from the upcountry hills of Sri Lanka. Here we go. Now then, Mr. THONDAMAN, I want to ask you about the pay, the minimum pay for the plantation workers. 1,000 rupees a day, which doesn't seem much, but it's as it is. Are you happy with the implementation?
Well, I'm not happy with the implementation, but I mean, to know about the wages, you need to go a few months back, because so before this 1,000 rupee wage came about, it was 700 rupees basic wage plus 50 rupees price share supplement. That's another pay they get. And you know, we tried a series of discussions, and unfortunately the discussions were, you know, they were not leading down a positive road. So we saw what the best possible option was, and to be very honest, this 1,000 rupees was politicized to such an extent where we had to get it, because it was a election promise as well to the people, you know, and people had provided me with the mandate for it, and I had to basically force the Labour Ministry's hand, and we went to the Wages Board. So the Wages Board, they gave a unanimous decision that 1,000 rupees have to be paid, and following which the RPCs took to court. And as of now, you know, the decision's in court, and it's, well, according to the Wages Board decision and the government gazette, the companies are supposed to pay 1,000, but they aren't paying 1,000. You know, it's quite sad what is happening in the hills, because they're using various methods of exploitation and loopholes to get away from paying this 1,000.
Would you compare it to modern day slavery?
Yeah, definitely. In fact, it would be worse, because, for example, if I can just elaborate on that. So if you take a tea estate worker, they are given a norm that is supposed to be plucked at 18 kilos usually, or 16 kilos, depending on the estates. You know, each estate is different. So let's say if it's 18 kilos, for example, let's say if it's 18 kilos, the tea estate worker will go pluck about 22 kilos. But then the management, to cut costs, what they will do is, they will cut 2 kilos, citing the weight of the basket. Sri Lanka is the only country in the world where you'll find the weight of the basket being 2 kilos. And then, following which, they'll cut another 2 kilos for moisture content in the leaf. And then, after that, they will cut another 3 kilos, saying factory shortage. Right. So they cut close to, you know, 4 plus 3, 7 kilos. So out of 22, you cut 7 kilos. You don't have much. So then the management will say, you haven't plucked the norm, 18 kilos, so I'm going to give you half pay. In Tamil, they say arapair, half pay, half name. So when a worker is supposed to get 1,000, they'll be getting 400, 450, or 500. So this is just one method of exploitation. There are, you know, a few others. For example, we don't know where this unaccounted tea is going for, number one. And number two, a worker is entitled a number of benefits which were enshrined in the previous collective agreement. But the company is citing the fact that the collective agreement had been abrogated. They had stopped those benefits, namely, to say that I'd like to go on record and say that we weren't the ones who abrogated the collective agreement. It was the companies that threw the first punch where they abrogated the collective agreement. And this is more like right now we are trying to talk to the companies, and I believe the Planters Association and the unions have come to the table, which is an improvement compared to what their relationship was with earlier. But I would also like to say that you can't blame the companies for this alone, because in 2014 it was the former Prime Minister who held up 1,000 rupee at Talawakala, if I'm not mistaken, and said, I will grant you 1,000 as soon as we come to power. So the workers did vote in favor of the 1,000, but 5 years passed by and they didn't receive that 1,000. And now when we came to power, the members in the opposition were citing the fact that the collective agreement is in place and only CWC can interfere, we can't interfere. And they used this as a excuse. So when they did abrogate the collective agreement, the members in the opposition who are running trade unions, they went silent. Now the collective agreement is not in place. CWC has no stake in the collective agreement. The unions in the opposition can go and talk, but still they're not able to. And even now, the workers, they face so many issues on a day-to-day basis with the management. Ceylon Workers Congress does represent them. We go and handle the labor tribunal cases and whatnot. And you won't be able to see many other unions do this. And I believe there was one particular individual who, vehemently opposed the collective agreement. And they very clearly said that in the former government, they could not give the 1,000 because of this collective agreement. And as I said earlier, the collective agreement is not in place. Anybody can go ahead and give it. And in fact, they spread this false propaganda amongst the people, where they got the people also to hate the collective agreement without realizing what it was. In every country, every field has a collective agreement. And the tea industry is something that survived on a collective agreement. But it came to a point where people said, we don't want the collective agreement. And today people realize the importance of the collective agreement. And so do the unions that are on the opposing side.
Do you feel that, apart from this being a rather crying shame, that it is the pursuance of pure profit on the part of the plantation companies and their management companies, that they resist this paying of this minimum 1,000, making it subject to all sorts of other matters, and to actively keep these plantation workers down in terms of their salary and so on? Because in other sectors, if there's a minimum wage, then it's a minimum wage, period. They can't be subject to anything. But it seems unfair that the workers on the plantations are subject to all sorts of conditions, if you like. And on top of that, in any event, the estates don't have 5 days of work. At the moment, some of these people are lucky to get 3 days' work. And then when you go and fiddle about with the things, they won't get their 1,000 rupees a day anyway.
But can you really blame the companies, though? Because the companies, at the end of the day, their goal is simple, to make profit, regardless of...
Well, that's true, but
But, I mean, to be very frank, we have 23 RPCs. I'm not going to name and shame certain RPCs, but there are some RPCs who are people-centric, who have cooperated with the unions. They are paying the 1,000 rupee wage, and it's going smoothly in certain estates. But as I mentioned earlier, their primary goal was to make profit.
That may well be, and I'm certain that it is. We are not living in some utopian Oxfam. But the fact of the matter remains that these lands are owned by the government. The government is the golden shareholder.
But even though the government is the golden shareholder, the government needs to find a way or a mechanism to enforce, for example, the subleasing of lands. That is happening. The cutting of trees, that's also happening. So many things are happening right under the government's nose, not just this government.
And these are unregulated.
No, there are rules governing this. The tea board, for example, in fact, Mr. Moligura, we are in very close touch with. And there is, after he had taken over, there have been some positive developments in enforcing these rules. For example, there were certain estates which were mixing ferrous additives in their tea. And Sri Lankan tea is considered the best in the world in terms of quality. But I don't think, these sort of practices would reflect on that.
So the felling of trees and so on, the timber so-called, and the mining for precious stones and whatever, isn't that sort of outside the scope of the original remit when granting the RPCs?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when the companies first took over the estates, their goal was to manage something the government could not manage at that particular point of time, because the government lacked the basic knowledge to run a tea estate. At the same time, they wanted to nationalize it. It's as simple as that. But as time went on, one interesting thing, my late father used to say that back in the day it was planters who were running the tea estates, but now it's all chartered accountants. That's why they want to see, they just want to balance the books. And with that being said, that is the mentality right now. For example, there was an article I had come across earlier in a leading English paper that the company, a spokesperson for the companies had mentioned that they had built 39,000 houses for the plantation workers from 1972. With whose money? It was done by the ministry. It was done by the government. You can't put a name and say that we are the ones who did it. It was Saumyamurthy Thondaman, the late Saumyamurthy Thondaman, who initiated building, individual houses for the people, and it was followed by the late Arumugam Thondaman and the late Chandrasekhar. Even though they were in rival parties, they worked together on providing housing for these workers. And all in all, they built close to 39,000 houses, and the former minister, with the assistance of India, had embarked on building 4,000 houses, and now, again with India's assistance, we have another 10,000 left to build. So with this being said, you could tell easily what the company's intention was. And one mistake I feel the unions made was the unions did not adapt to the world evolving. We stuck to the same traditional unionizing and whatnot. In fact, we should have come out, this is, in fact, I believe this is the first time someone from a leading trade union in upcountry would have come for an interview in an English channel. And, there are certain things that people are not aware about. For example, if I may just add on, for example, there are the people in the urban sectors, they believe unions are the ones exploiting the workers, which is not true. If we were exploiting the workers, why would we be getting back into parliament again and again and again? Maybe if one generation was conditioned to vote for one particular person, why should the next generation be conditioned? They all are capable of thinking. They all are capable of analyzing and judging. The truth is, they know that the unions have stood there. And I know we have opposing unions, and I will defend them as well. They are doing their work, we are doing our work, we are doing our work more, that's a different case. But, the unions are not the ones exploiting the people. And if those who criticize the unions were to take a look, I'll be more than happy to host them in my house in Kottagala. They can come take a look at what is happening in the estates and see who is exploiting who.
And for this segment, another question very quickly is that I hear what you say about the plight of the situation, like the ground reality. Have you, or what drawbacks are there to providing community housing, like, for want of a better word, multi-unit dwellings, flats, for example? Is that not possible?
The late Minister Arumugam Thondaman, he had come up with the concept of building flats, because to accommodate and whatnot. But as the former government came in, they criticized that move. They said, people want individual houses, they don't want flats, and they created this propaganda again amongst the people, where basically politics, just overrode logic. And when this happened, there were a lot of issues, and now it's politicized again. So we are trying to change the system a bit, but however, it will take time. But Mr. Faraz, if I may, my stand on this, other politicians from upcountry, their stand may be, their election promise would have been, I will build 5 houses, and another person would have been, I'll build 10 houses and 15 houses and whatnot. But
what's your stand?
My stand is that is not progress. That is not development by any means. Building a house is not development. Giving the opportunity to build a house is development. There are so many people in upcountry, and I will stand by my people on this. There are so many people in upcountry, including tea estate workers, whom everyone labels as poor and downtrodden. There are so many people who are capable of building their own houses. But the true problem in this is not the housing, it is the land rights. Because how the companies work, how the RPCs work, is that if person A does not work for me, he cannot live in my estate. But person A's family has been there for more than 150 years. So who are these people, the companies who came in 30 years ago to say that he does not have the right to live in my estate? This is a problem that has been overlooked time and time again. People in the estate sector do not have rights to own land.
They don't have rights to own land on the estate where they've been living.
Where they've been living for generations. Why? Because if they don't work in the estate, they don't have the right.
But that's sort of indented labor.
Well, welcome to Sri Lanka.
As the member of the CWC and so on, and as its Secretary General, I'd like to ask you quite candidly, if I was looking at this from the perspective of a plantation worker, and I'm a member of the CWC, and I'm paying my 5 rupees a day, or so on, what sort of return on investment are the plantation workers getting by virtue of their membership of your organization?
Well, this has been a question that has been on everyone's minds, from the time, trade unionism started. Where does this money go to? And we have clearly given our accounts as well. We have 48 offices. That is why CWC is one of the, the third largest trade union here. We have 48 offices ranging from Vavuniya all the way to Gaul. And all these offices have staff in them, staff taken from the plantation who cater to these people on a daily basis. Anyone with an issue, in fact, I can just go openly, on record and say that even members from other unions come to our offices to get work done. In fact, if you were to come to Nuwara and take a look, we have labor tribunal cases happening on a daily basis. And we have lawyers who are recruited on a daily basis to attend to these cases. Supported by the CWC. And in fact, in certain estates, if we call for a strike, we are the only union who still provide them with relief packages to sustain themselves for the period of that strike. And moreover, most important, we have our headquarters, CLF, Congress Labour Foundation. Through this Congress Labour Foundation, we not only do trade union activities, but we also provide livelihood programs. Now due to COVID, everything is shut down. But we had plans of starting an IT class, English classes for the children of these estate workers and whatnot, just to let them branch out.
At the end of this program, it would be incomplete if I didn't ask you a question about a friend of our network and well-known personality, of course, your dad. And I'm sure the people miss him. I want to know from you, how much do you miss your father on a daily basis?
Well, for me, it's more of a thin line, because growing up, there was father figure on one side, and then there was the leader of a community on another. So, speaking from the perspective of a son, we never really had that much time to spend with our father, because, during the war, my father was a very powerful cabinet minister, and he was always with the people. So, in fact, my father has even told the media at one point, I believe, my family is one eye and the people are my other eye. I can't forsake one for the other. And, in times of political turmoil or in times of decision making, even I miss the leader, THONDAMAN. But in times of, coming back home after a terrible day, I do miss my father. But, I believe that he's always with us. So.
Does he remain an inspiration?
Yes, not only to me, but to hundreds and thousands of other people all around Sri Lanka.
JEEWAN THONDAMAN, it's been brilliant speaking to you. Thank you very much. And that's the way it was on Newsline Zoom. Take care, have a great evening, and as always, God bless you.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.